If you're running a manufacturing plant, a hospital, a data center, a school system, or a large commercial operation, and you're thinking about solar, combined heat and power, or some other on site generation to cut your bill and improve resilience, there is a line item that can blindside you. You install the system, the project team celebrates, the generator is running, and a new line shows up on your bill. Standby service, supplemental service, or backup service, and the number anchored to it is not small. If that sounds familiar or you want to avoid ever being in that position, this episode is for you because today we're decoding utility standby charges for on site generation. By the time we're done, you'll understand what standby charges are, why they exist, the main ways utilities calculate them, and the specific metrics you need to track so you can make sure any on site generation project you consider is grounded in reality, not just a pretty pro forma. I am Daniel Burke. This is Energy Answers by Tactical Energy Group. We're going to talk about standby charges at the level where you can sit down with your project team and your utility and ask the right questions. You are going to quarterback the process. So let me start with a straight answer to the decision question. You asked, how can we minimize utility standby charges while maximizing the benefits of our on site generation system? And here is the short answer. Standby charges are the price you pay to keep a live connection to the grid in case your on site generation cannot carry your full load. You do not eliminate them unless you completely cut the cord. What you can do is, well, one, understand exactly how your utility's standby tariff works. Two, make sure the specific standby treatment for your project matches the written tariff and not some extra interpretation. And three, size and operate your on site generation and your reserved capacity so you're not paying for more readiness than you actually need. Everything else flows from those pieces. Now let's define what we're actually talking about. What are utility standby charges? Utility standby charges are fees applied to customers who generate some of their own electricity but stay connected to the grid. They are sometimes called standby service, supplemental service, or reserve service. They exist because even if your generator is carrying most of your load on a normal day, the utility still has to be ready every hour of every day to pick up your entire load if that generator fails, needs maintenance, or simply cannot cover a high load hour. So, from the utility's perspective, they must maintain generation, transmission, and distribution assets as if you might need them at any moment. Standby charges are how they get paid for that readiness. So if you think of your grid connection as an insurance policy against your own plant not covering you, standby is the premium. Why do utilities charge these fees at all? First, fixed costs. The cost to build and maintain the grid does not disappear just because you install a generator behind the meter. Wires still have to be ready, transformers still have to be sized and maintained, generation still has to be planned so the system can support you if your equipment is offline, and at that moment you'll really want it to. Second, reliability for critical facilities, hospitals, data centers, manufacturers that cannot afford a long outage. The ability to lean on the grid when it's needed is part of your resilience and business continuity strategy. The utility has to design for that. Third, cost allocation. If the utility did not have some standby structure, non-self-generating customers would end up covering a bigger share of the fixed grid costs, while self-generators still rely on the grid when something goes wrong. Regulators care a lot about avoiding that discrepancy. So, from their side, standby is a cost allocation tool. From your side, it's a line item you have to understand before you ever call a project paid back. Now, how do these charges actually show up? Standby structures vary a lot by utility and state, but most of what you'll see fits into a few categories. The most important bucket is demand-based standby charges. Within that, you'll see terms like Contract demand or reservation capacity. This is a charge applied to a specific amount of grid capacity in kW, kilowatts, that you agree to reserve. It might be set equal to your generator's nameplate capacity, your expected maximum import, or a negotiated number. You pay for that reserved capacity every month, whether you use it or not. Ratcheted demand. This is standby that's pinned to the past high demand event. A common pattern is something like your standby billing demand will be the greater of this month's maximum demand and a percentage of the highest demand over the last 12 months. If your generator fails once at a bad moment and you pull a lot of power from the grid, that event can set an elevated standby demand for many, many months, and it's very costly. Supplemental demand. This is demand from the grid when your on site generation is running, but it does not cover the entire load. You may see a structure where the utility treats some portion of your load as supplemental service and charges specific fees on that supplemental portion. Maintenance demand. Some tariffs have a separate treatment for times when your generator is down for planned maintenance. The idea is that the utility knows you'll need backup at those times and it charges you accordingly. You may also see energy based standby charges. These are per kilowatt hour charges that apply specifically to energy supplied during standby events. These are less central than the demand pieces, but they exist in some tariffs. Fixed standby charges, a monthly fee for just having a grid connected generator meant to cover the administrative and interconnection overhead. Interconnection fees, one time or recurring charges tied to the engineering review, protection equipment, and operational coordination required to connect your system. There are ancillary service charges. In some markets, standby customers are assigned a share of a certain system level service through specific riders. A key detail is how the utility sets the reservation capacity number that all of this sits on. In some tariffs, it's simply the nameplate capacity of your on site generator. If you install 2 megawatts, the standby reservation is 2 megawatts. In others, it might be a contracted number you negotiate. And in still others, it might be a percentage of your historical peak before the generator was installed. You can see how different that is. If you have a 2 megawatt solar array that only produces for a portion of the hours in the year, but your standby charges are based on the full 2 megawatts every month at a fixed dollar per kilowatt, that is a very different economics story than if your standby is based on your net import capacity after solar. It's also complex. This is why you cannot treat standby as a generic afterthought. You have to know exactly what mechanism your specific utility uses for your specific rate. Now, let's talk about the grid level benefits because understanding those helps you have a more grounded conversation. From a system perspective, standby charges ensure grid reliability for everyone, including you. The utility has to design for worst case conditions, including many self generators needing help all at once. They make interconnection possible at scale. Having a way to recover fixed costs for readiness makes utilities more willing to approve distributed energy projects and keep the grid stable around them. They encourage realistic sizing and operation. When standby has a cost, it nudges projects away from fantasy designs that assume the grid will always be there and it'll be there for free. They provide a framework for cost allocation so other customers are not subsidizing you when you end up leaning on the grid. So, at a system level, standby is not evil. It's just part of how we keep the grid funded. But from your seat, the primary concern is very specific. Will these charges erode or eliminate the financial benefit I thought I was going to get from my on site generation project? That question cannot be answered with an industry soundbite. It has to be answered with math on your project. So let me give you a simple framing. Imagine you have a $200,000 monthly bill and your proposed combined heat and power project is expected to reduce that to $50,000. So you're saving $150,000 in a typical month. If on top of that new bill you face $30,000 in standby charges based on your reserve capacity, your real savings are not 150, they are 120. Still good, but very different than what the slide deck said. Now, Change the numbers. If your generator runs less than expected or the standby structure is harsher than you realized, those standby charges can eat a much larger share of the perceived savings. That is the core risk. Not that standby exists, but that you approve a project where the standby story was never modeled correctly. So let's clear up some common misunderstandings. Misunderstanding number one: if I generate all my own power, I will not pay the utility anything. Well, as long as you keep a live connection to the grid, you will pay something for that connection. That might be a combination of basic facilities charges, demand charges, and standby charges. Complete grid defection is the only way around that, and for most commercial and industrial facilities, it's just not realistic. Misunderstanding number two: standby charges are only for backup generators. They apply to any grid connected on site generation. That includes solar panels, combined heat and power, fuel cells, and storage systems, not just emergency generators. Under- Misunderstanding number three: my net metering agreement covers all of this, so I'm good. Net metering, where it exists, is about energy in kilowatt hours. Standby is mostly about demand and reserved capacity in kW and kilowatts. They are different mechanisms. Netting out energy over a month does not erase the need for the grid to be ready for your worst 15-minute interval, and that is a kW concern. Misunderstanding number four: our generator is small, so standby doesn't really apply. Application thresholds are defined in tariffs, and they are usually tied to customer type and the presence of any grid connected generation, not just big projects. You do not get a free pass just because the nameplate number feels modest. Misunderstanding number five: if we add a battery, standby goes away. Storage can help you control when and how much you draw from the grid. It can help with demand management and standby interactions, but unless you completely disconnect, the utility still has to plan for moments when your on site assets are not enough. That planning still has price. So, what do you actually do with all of this information? In part one, the main goal is not to design every mitigation tactic. It's to make sure that you never again look at on site generation as a proposal that does not explicitly address the cost of standby power. Practically, that looks like this. Step one: get your arms around the standby section of your utility's tariff. You need to know, what is the name of the standby schedule that applies to your customer class? How is reservation capacity defined? Contract demand, nameplate, historical peak? What are the dollar per kilowatt hour rates for that reservation? How do ratchets, if any, work over what look back period? At what percentage? Is there separate treatment for supplemental and maintenance demand? What portion of that schedule is fixed monthly fees versus demand based versus energy based? Step two: document your own numbers. What's your current peak demand on the grid before any on site generation? What is the nameplate capacity of the generator or the system that's being proposed? What is its realistic capacity factor and availability, not the perfect world number? What is the maximum import you expect to need from the grid once the system is installed? Step three: insist that any feasibility study or vendor proposal shows standby charges as their own line item calculated from the tariff using your numbers. Make sure it states explicitly which standby schedule is being used and how reservation capacity was set. Make sure it runs downside scenarios where the generator is available fewer hours than advertised or where a bad event sets a ratchet. And step four: talk to the utility, but do it with specificity. Here's the key operator question you should be asking. In my view, can you show me in writing exactly which standby rate schedule you are applying to our project? How are you setting our reserved capacity under that schedule? And how will that show up on our bill month by month? You're not attacking anyone, you're simply making sure that what they propose matches the writing in the tariff. Sometimes utilities can get creative with less mainstream charges. It's easy in a meeting for someone to say, oh, we usually just treat projects like this with X fee. If you don't know the tariff, that sounds authoritative. But if you do, you can say, great, point me to the page and let's run the actual math with my data. That alone can save you from agreeing to terms you did not need to accept and that would absolutely put you at a disadvantage. So let me give you a simple spoken explanation you can share with your team. The grid is there to provide electricity, and it is very expensive to maintain. If you have any relationship to a partial or future reliance on that grid, you're going to pay for it. Unless you want no relationship to the grid whatsoever and you're comfortable having no additional capacity beyond what you can provide and no backup if your plan fails, you will have to pay something for reserved capacity. Standby is the utility's fee for being there to catch you when your on site generation cannot. That is the mental model I want you to keep with you. So let's recap, and then I'll give you a few questions for your morning huddle. One, standby charges are not punishment for installing on site generation, they are the price of keeping the grid in your corner. Two, the real danger is not the existence of standby, it's approving a project where standby was never modeled correctly. Three, standby is mostly demand based. Contract demand, ratcheted demand, supplemental, and maintenance demand. And how those are defined in KW drive the size of the bill. Four, the way reservation capacity is set, nameplate, contract, or historical peaks, is one of the highest leverage details in your economic consideration. Five, on site generation can absolutely still be worth it in high cost regions for critical facilities, for combined heat and power with strong thermal loads, and as part of resilience strategy. But the feasibility study is not complete until standby has been explicitly accounted for. Now, look, as you know, I don't run your plant. That's your job. My job is to translate the mess and complexity of utility billing and give you questions and perhaps leverage you're not getting from the vendor's deck or from a rate book, and certainly not from utility customer service. The bottom line on utility standby charges for on site generation is this: as long as you stay grid tied, you will pay something for the grid to be ready for you. Your job is to know exactly how that something is calculated in your tariff. Make sure your project's standby treatment matches that language and run your own data through it before you ever call an on site generation project a good deal. Now, here are a few questions you can take into a morning huddle with your team or your qualified energy partner. First, what is the exact standby or supplemental service schedule in our utilities rate book that would apply if we installed or expand on site generation, and how does it define reservation capacity? Second, for our proposed project, what number in KW is the utility planning to use as our standby reservation? Is it generator nameplate, a negotiated contract demand, or a percentage of our historical peak from the grid? Third, in the pro forma we've been shown for this on site project, where are standby charges explicitly modeled, and what standby demand rate in dollars per kilowatt per month did they assume? Fourth, if our generator comes offline during a high load hour and we pull our full load from the grid just one time, how would that event be treated under the standby ratchet rules in our tariff, and what would that mean for the next 12 months of bills? If you cannot get clear answers to those questions, you're not ready to sign off on the project. Now, two quick groups before we close. If this episode helped you understand standby charges better, but you're not in the middle of a project right now, the best thing you can do is send this episode to another operator, a superintendent, an executive you know who's talking about on site generation. Share it with them before they get surprised by a standby line item on their bill, and maybe their project really doesn't go how they needed it to go. But look, if you're in a second group, you're actively evaluating solar, combined heat and power, storage, or any other on site generation in the next 3 to 6 months, I built something specifically for you. It's called the Energy Decision Blueprint. And here's who it's for: it's for Indiana commercial and industrial operators with a serious electric bill who are considering or being pitched on site generation projects that will on-site generation projects that will stay grid tied. That might be a CHP system, a solar plus storage project, or a generator upgrade that changes your relationship with the grid. Here's what you get. First, a short discovery and fit call. We confirm there is enough spend and enough complexity around standby, demand, and resilience that a deeper look will actually help you. And if it will, we pull your data, at least 12 months of bills, interval data where available, and the technical and commercial details of the proposed on site generation system. Third, we schedule a 60 to 90-minute working session. And in that session, I sit down with you. And when it makes sense, I'll bring in one of our other rate experts. We'll plug your data and the proposed project into the same tools we use for our existing customers and walk through what your bill is doing today, including demand, riders, and any existing standby type charges. How the specific standby schedule in your tariff would treat your proposed on site generation, reservation capacity, ratchets, supplemental demand, and any fixed fees. What your effective all in cost and savings would have looked like over the last year with that project in place, including standby, not just the headline savings number. And fourth, you'll get a simple board ready summary. It's 1 or 2 pages that lays out your current state, the proposed project, the range of realistic outcomes once standby is considered, and my view on whether the project makes sense economically and under what conditions. Now, for qualified accounts, this energy decision blueprint is free. And there are only 2 acceptable outcomes. If there's a real play, we'll show you exactly what it looks like with standby fully considered and fully baked in. But if there's not, we'll tell you that so you do not lock yourself into an investment that only worked on paper because someone ignored a line in the rate book. If you want that for your utility standby charges and your on site generation plans, go to tacticalenergygroup.com, look for Energy Decision Blueprint, and use the link there to raise your hand. Again, it's tacticalenergygroup.com. Thanks for listening to Energy Answers by Tactical Energy Group. If this helped, send it to another operator who's dealing with the same headache and visit tacticalenergygroup.com to get more practical tools for your facilities.